My aunt faked illness to steal family donations. The first thing that felt wrong was the weight of the envelope in my hand. It was thicker than I expected, stuffed enough that the flap wouldn't stay down. I was standing in my aunt's kitchen, right by the sink, because she'd asked me to rinse out a mug she said she couldn't lift anymore. Her voice came from the living room, weak and drawn out, talking to my mother about how tired she was. I remember thinking that the envelope felt heavier than anything I'd brought over in the last few weeks. I hadn't meant to open it. It was addressed to her in my cousin's handwriting, and I only picked it up because it was sliding off the counter and I didn't want it to get wet. When I grabbed it, a stack of cash shifted inside, enough that the corner poked out. That stopped me. Nobody in our family mailed cash like that, unless it was for something serious. I slid the envelope back where it was and turned on the faucet. As the water ran, I heard my aunt cough in the other room, the same dry, careful cough she'd been using for months. It always sounded practiced to me, like she knew exactly when to do it and when to stop. I shut off the water and dried my hands, but instead of going back to the living room, I stood there staring at the envelope. There were more on the counter. 2 more. Both thick, both unopened. One had my uncle's handwriting. Another had no return address at all, just her name written carefully in blue ink. My stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with sympathy. I picked one up and held it against the light from the window. You could see the outlines of bills inside, stacked neatly. I told myself to put it down. I told myself it wasn't my business. But I was already thinking about the way she'd texted the family group chat the night before, saying she couldn't afford a new medication and that the insurance was fighting her again. I opened the envelope with my cousin's name on it. Inside were 20s and 50s, folded flat, with a short note that said, "Hope this helps. Call me if you need more." No mention of amounts, no receipts, no specifics. Just trust. My heart started beating fast, and I felt stupid for being surprised. Of course people were sending her money. We all were. I dropped off an envelope myself the week before, slid it through the mail slot because she said she was too weak to come to the door. From the living room, she laughed. It was brief, but it was real. It wasn't the thin voice she used when she talked about doctors or pain. It was a normal laugh, the one I remembered from when I was younger. It cut through me. I stepped closer to the doorway and looked in. She was sitting upright on the couch, hair brushed, color in her face. My mother sat across from her, leaning forward, concerned. On the coffee table between them was a small decorative jar with a handwritten label taped to it. Medical fund. It was half full of cash. My aunt saw me and quickly pulled a blanket up over her legs, like she'd been caught out of bed. Her expression shifted, the smile draining away. "Did you get the mug?" she asked. I nodded and walked in, still holding the envelope. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't even know what I was accusing her of, not clearly. All I knew was that something didn't add up. "What's that?" my mother asked, pointing at my hand. "Mail," I said. My voice sounded flat to my own ears. "Oh," my aunt said quickly. "Just put it there." She gestured toward the table, toward the jar. As I set the envelope down, it brushed against the side of the jar and tipped it slightly. A few bills slid out and landed on the table. Nobody moved to pick them up. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My aunt's eyes flicked to the money, then back to me. Her hand tightened on the blanket. "That's a lot," my mother said, quietly. My aunt sighed, the practiced sigh I'd heard so many times. "It goes fast," she said. "You have no idea how expensive this all is." I looked at the jar, at the envelopes, at her face. "What medication are you taking right now?" I asked. She hesitated, just long enough. "The new one," she said. "The one I told you about." "What's it called?" She stared at me, and for the first time, the sick act slipped. There was irritation there, sharp and defensive. "Why are you interrogating me?" she snapped. Then she coughed, softer this time, like she remembered she was supposed to. My mother looked between us, confused. "What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. I bent down and picked up one of the bills that had fallen. It was crisp, like it had just come from the bank. "I think we need to talk about this," I said. My aunt's face went pale, not with illness, but with something closer to fear. After I said we needed to talk, my aunt leaned back into the couch like the strength had gone out of her all at once. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple and closed her eyes. My mother immediately stood up and went to her side, asking if she was okay, if she needed water. The shift was so fast it almost made me doubt myself. "I don't feel well," my aunt said. "This stress isn't good for me." That was always her move. Any pushback became a threat to her health. My mother shot me a look that said I was being cruel, that this wasn't the time. I felt that familiar pressure to back down, to apologize. Instead, I sat in the chair across from her and stayed quiet. Context mattered, and I needed my mother to remember it too. My aunt had been sick for almost a year. It started vague. Fatigue. Pain that moved around. Doctors who couldn't figure it out. Every few weeks there was a new test, a new possible diagnosis, none of them ever firm enough to pin down. She shared just enough detail to sound convincing, but never paperwork, never names. When anyone asked questions, she'd say she was too tired to explain. The donations started after she told the family she'd been denied short-term disability. My uncle had left years earlier, my cousin lived out of state, and suddenly my aunt was framed as alone and fragile. My mother organized help without telling anyone, passing the jar around at family dinners, dropping off groceries, slipping her cash. I had gone along with it because that's what we did. She was family. When I'd brought over my own envelope, she'd hugged me longer than usual and whispered, "You're saving me." I'd felt proud and uncomfortable at the same time. Sitting there now, I looked at my mother. "Can you tell me what her diagnosis is?" I asked her, not my aunt. My mother frowned. "She has something autoimmune, or maybe neurological. They're still testing." "That's what she told you," I said. "Not what you've seen." My aunt opened her eyes. "I don't have to prove anything to you." "I'm not asking for proof," I said. "I'm asking for clarity. Because people are sending you cash. A lot of it." She reached for the jar and pulled it closer to her chest, protective. "This is for medical expenses." "Which ones?" I asked. "Because you told me last week you couldn't afford medication, but these bills are brand new." My mother finally sat down again, slower this time. The concern on her face was changing into something else. Confusion, maybe. Doubt. "I don't like where this is going," my aunt said. Her voice hardened. "I thought family was supposed to help, not accuse." "No one's accusing," my mother said automatically, but she didn't sound sure. I leaned forward. "Then help us understand. Show us a prescription, a bill, something." My aunt shook her head. "I can't believe you'd do this to me." She stood up suddenly, steady on her feet, no wobble at all, and walked toward the hallway. "I need to lie down," she said. "This conversation is over." She disappeared into the bedroom and closed the door hard enough that the frame rattled. My mother and I sat there in silence, the jar still on the table between us. Neither of us reached for it. She didn't come out of the bedroom for almost an hour. During that time, my mother kept glancing down the hallway, then back at me, like she was waiting for one of us to apologize. I stayed where I was. The longer we sat there, the more the scene replayed in my head, and the less accidental it felt. When my aunt finally emerged, she'd changed. Her hair was loose, her face pale again, and she moved slower, one hand dragging along the wall. She didn't look at me. She went straight to my mother and lowered herself into the chair beside her, leaning in close. "I didn't want to say this in front of her," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "But the doctor told me stress can trigger flare-ups. Confrontations like that can make things dangerous." My mother's shoulders tensed. She turned to me. Maybe this wasn't the right time. There it was, the shift. The illness wasn't just a reason anymore, it was a weapon. "I wasn't yelling," I said. "I asked questions." My aunt winced like I'd raised my voice. "See? Even now, you don't hear yourself." She reached for my mother's hand and squeezed it. "I've been trying so hard to stay positive. I didn't want everyone worrying, but I'm scared." "What are you scared of?" my mother asked. My aunt hesitated, then said quietly, "That if people stop helping, I won't make it." The words hung in the air. They were vague enough to be terrifying, specific enough to shut things down. My mother nodded, eyes glassy. I felt my chest tighten. "That's not fair," I said. "You can't say things like that without explaining." My aunt finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't weak now. It was sharp, calculating. "You think I want this?" she asked. "You think I enjoy begging?" "No," I said. "I think you're avoiding details." She shook her head and turned back to my mother. "I knew this would happen. I told you she's always been suspicious of me, ever since I got sick." "That's not true," I said, but my mother was already frowning at me. "You've been under a lot of stress too," my aunt continued. "Maybe this is hard for you to process. Some people need control when they're scared." It took me a second to realize what she was doing. She wasn't defending herself, she was reframing me as the problem. My mother squeezed her hand back. "Let's not push her," she said to me. "She's vulnerable right now." Vulnerable. That word settled over everything, heavy and final. I stood up. "I'm not going to argue," I said, "but I'm not comfortable with this." My aunt sighed, exhausted. "Then maybe you should take a break from visiting," she said softly. "I don't need this kind of negativity while I'm fighting for my life." My mother didn't object. She just looked tired. As I walked out, I realized something cold and clear. My aunt hadn't answered a single question. And somehow, she'd made me the one who owed an apology. I didn't go back to her house for a while after that, but her presence didn't disappear. It actually intensified. She started sending long texts to the family group chat late at night, usually around 11 or 12, when people were tired and less likely to question things. The messages were always framed as updates, never requests, but the implication was clear. "Rough day, couldn't keep food down, trying to stay strong. Insurance denied another claim. I don't know how much more I can fight." People responded the way she wanted, heart emojis, prayers, offers to help. My mother would screenshot them and send them to me, privately, adding, "See, she's really struggling." I stopped replying. Then the escalation started. One afternoon my cousin called me, her voice tight. She asked if I'd heard that our aunt had been taken to the ER. I hadn't. Apparently my aunt had told her she collapsed from pain and dehydration, that the doctors were concerned. No hospital name, no doctor's name, just concern. Later that night, my aunt posted a photo in the group chat. It showed her wrist with a hospital band, but the details were cropped out. No date, no location. Just enough to be convincing. She said she was being discharged early because she couldn't afford to stay. The donation jar reappeared, this time digitally. My mother set up a shared spreadsheet to keep track of who'd helped, which my aunt framed as accountability. In reality, it turned into a leaderboard. Names, amounts, dates, anyone who hadn't contributed recently stood out. I was listed, with my last donation highlighted. My aunt started mentioning me directly. I know not everyone can help, she'd write. Some people have their own priorities. It was subtle, but I could feel eyes on me even through a phone screen. When I confronted my mother, she said I was reading too much into it. She's under pressure, she said. Don't make this about you. But it was becoming about me. Every boundary I set became evidence of my supposed cruelty. My aunt told relatives I was in denial about her condition, that I couldn't accept the idea of losing her. She framed my skepticism as fear, my distance as immaturity. One evening, I got a text from her directly. I don't want conflict between us, it said. But your attitude is affecting my recovery. If you can't be supportive, it might be best if you stop interfering. Interfering. I hadn't touched the jar since that day. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Then I typed back. I'm not interfering. I'm asking for honesty. She never replied. Instead, the next morning, my mother called to tell me my aunt had had a setback, stress-related. She said my aunt was asking that I not come around for her own health. I hung up and sat there, realizing how completely the situation had flipped. The questions were gone, the money was flowing faster, and I was officially the problem. The proof didn't come from anything dramatic. No confession, no hospital slip-up. It came from a bank notification on my phone that I almost ignored. My aunt had added me as an authorized viewer on her checking account months earlier, back when she said she was scared something might happen to her and wanted someone responsible to have access. At the time, it felt invasive, but also flattering in a strange way. I'd forgotten about it completely. That morning, a deposit alert popped up. $200. Memo line. Family help. I opened the app without really thinking, then froze. The balance was higher than I expected, much higher. I scrolled. Another deposit from 3 days earlier, then one from the week before. All cash deposits, all round numbers. None of them matched medical reimbursements or insurance payments. They matched envelopes. I went further back. Grocery store withdrawals that didn't make sense given how often people brought her food, ATM withdrawals late at night, then, buried in the middle of it all, a payment to an online retailer I recognized immediately because I'd bought from them myself. Luxury bedding, over $800. My hands started shaking. I clicked through the transaction history, heart pounding, feeling like I was doing something wrong even though the access was legitimate. Shoes, a streaming service subscription she'd once complained she couldn't afford. A hotel charge from a town 2 hours away, dated the same week she'd told everyone she was too weak to get out of bed. I took screenshots. Not because I planned to confront her right then, but because I was afraid I'd convince myself later that I imagined it. I called my cousin. She didn't answer. I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. By the time my mother called back that evening, I was calm in a way that scared me. I told her I'd seen the account. I told her exactly what was in it. I didn't accuse. I listed facts. There was a long silence. She said that account was for everything, my mother finally said. Medical and personal. Then why did she say she couldn't afford medication? I asked. Another silence. Then quieter. She told me the money was gone. I emailed my cousin the screenshots. This time she replied within minutes. Just 2 words. Oh no. For the first time since it started, I wasn't alone with it, and that made it impossible to unsee. The illness wasn't just vague anymore. It was profitable. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It came in waves, each one leaving something broken behind. My mother didn't confront her immediately. She needed time, she said. Time to process, time to calm down, time to approach it gently. I understood that, but it felt like watching a slow leak after you already knew the pipe was cracked. Every day that passed, more money moved. When my mother finally went over with the screenshots printed out, my aunt cried. According to my mother, she cried hard enough to scare her. She said the stress of being questioned had pushed her over the edge, that she'd been self-medicating with small comforts because she didn't know how else to cope. She never denied the purchases. She just reframed them. I needed something to feel normal, she told my mother. I didn't think it mattered where the money went as long as I was still alive. When my mother asked about the hotel, my aunt said it was for a specialist consult she'd been too embarrassed to talk about. When asked for a name, she said she couldn't remember. My mother came home pale and quiet. She told me everything, then sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. I don't know what to believe anymore, she said. That was the damage, not just the money, but the erosion. Every memory involving my aunt started to feel unstable. I replayed hugs, phone calls, the way she'd leaned on people, and I couldn't tell where need ended and performance began. My cousin stopped sending money immediately. She also stopped answering my aunt's calls. Within days, my aunt started telling people my cousin had abandoned her, that she was heartless, that illness revealed people's true nature. About me, she said less. She didn't need to. The silence did the work. I was no longer mentioned in updates. When relatives asked why, my aunt would sigh and say, "We're just very different people." The jar disappeared from the coffee table. In its place was a new narrative: betrayal. My aunt told my mother she felt violated, that having her finances spied on was worse than anything she'd done. She said trust had been broken. My mother cried that night. Not for my aunt, but for herself. For having pushed people to give. For having defended something that didn't deserve it. I sat with her and said nothing. There was nothing clean to say. No resolution. Just a shared understanding that something fundamental had cracked, and it wasn't going to seal back up. Once the money stopped, the consequences stopped being private. My aunt's tone changed first. The late night updates slowed, then vanished altogether. When she did send messages, they were shorter and colder. No more vulnerability, no more fear, just statements. Rough week. Handling things. Nothing that invited help, because help wasn't coming anymore. Then the story started spreading outward. An older relative called me to say she was concerned about the conflict. She'd heard my aunt was being financially controlled by family members who didn't believe she was sick. Another asked my mother if it was true we were cutting her off. My mother denied it, but the damage was already moving on its own. My aunt filed a complaint with her church, claiming she'd been promised assistance that was suddenly withdrawn. The pastor called my mother to mediate. My mother declined. That refusal was added to the story too. A week later, my aunt posted publicly for the first time a long message about invisible illness and how people only support you when it's convenient. She didn't name names, she didn't have to. Several relatives liked it. One commented, "So sad when family turns their back." I stopped attending family gatherings, not because anyone asked me to stay away, but because I could feel the shift. Conversations went quiet when I entered a room. People watched what they said around me. I'd become associated with something uncomfortable, something that forced people to choose between sympathy and reality. My aunt moved shortly after. She told people it was for her health, that she needed a fresh environment. She didn't give an address. She did, however, restart the narrative with new people. A friend of mine mentioned seeing her name in a local fundraiser post. Same language, same illness, different audience. Nothing legal ever happened. No one demanded repayment. The amounts were too small individually, too embarrassing collectively. It dissolved into discomfort and distance. The family didn't split cleanly. It frayed. And my aunt slipped out through the loose threads, carrying her story with her, untouched by consequences that could actually stop her. After everything settled into that quiet, fractured shape, I expected to feel relief. Instead, what I felt was something closer to vertigo. My sense of people, of what was solid and what wasn't, felt permanently off. I started questioning my own reactions. How long had I missed it? How many times had I ignored small inconsistencies because it was easier to be kind than precise? I replayed moments that had once felt intimate or sincere and noticed details I'd skimmed over before. The way her symptoms never seemed to interrupt things she wanted to do. The way emergencies always aligned with rent or holidays. The way she never let anyone accompany her to appointments. I also noticed what it had done to me personally. I was slower to offer help to anyone after that. When friends talked about struggling financially or emotionally, my first instinct wasn't empathy anymore. It was suspicion. I hated that. I hated how alert I'd become, how every story now felt like it needed verification. At night, I'd lie awake thinking about the envelope in my hand that first day. The weight of it. The moment I could have put it down and walked away. I wondered if part of me had known even then, and just hadn't wanted to name it. Family interactions felt rehearsed after that. Everyone careful, everyone aware that belief itself could be dangerous. My mother changed too. She stopped organizing help for people. When someone asked, she'd suggest resources instead of cash. I could tell she was afraid of being wrong again. As for my aunt, she still crossed my mind more often than I wanted. Not with anger exactly. More with a dull sense of unease, like knowing someone you loved had been speaking a different language the whole time, and you'd only just realized it. What stuck with me most wasn't the lie itself. It was how easily it had bent everyone around it. How quickly reality became negotiable if the story was sad enough. That realization didn't make me wiser. It made me quieter. And in some ways, lonelier. The decision didn't come with a speech or a confrontation. It came quietly, on an ordinary afternoon, when my aunt's name showed up on my phone again. She hadn't contacted me directly in months. The message was short. "Heard you've been saying things about me. We should clear the air." I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to explain myself, to correct whatever version of the story she was telling now. I could already feel the familiar pull to be reasonable, to smooth things over, to prove I wasn't the villain she'd painted. Then I realized something simple and final. Any response at all would put me back in her orbit. I didn't owe her clarity. I didn't owe her closure. I'd already given enough. I didn't reply. A few days later, my mother told me my aunt was upset that I'd shut her out. She said my aunt felt hurt, confused, abandoned. The same words, recycled again. I listened, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to defend myself. "I'm done engaging," I said. That's not punishment, it's just where I am. My mother nodded. She didn't argue. That told me everything. I blocked my aunt's number that night. I muted her on social media. I didn't announce it. I didn't tell relatives. I just removed the access. Quietly. The same way she'd quietly taken advantage for so long. There was guilt, of course. Not sharp, but persistent. The kind that asks if you're being cruel by choosing distance. I let it sit without trying to solve it. I'd learned that urgency was part of the trap. Cutting contact didn't fix the family. It didn't repair trust. But it stopped the ongoing harm. It stopped the constant low-level stress of waiting for the next crisis, the next ask, the next rewrite of reality. For the first time since that day in the kitchen, I felt steady. Not righteous, not vindicated, just steady. And I knew I wasn't going back. Life didn't reset after that. It just kept going, slightly altered, like furniture moved a few inches to the left. My aunt became a name that surfaced occasionally, usually secondhand. Someone would mention she'd posted something vague online. Someone else would say they heard she'd moved again. The illness stayed part of the story, but it was less central now, more background noise. People listened without leaning in the way they used to. In our immediate family, there was an unspoken agreement not to bring her up unless necessary. Not because it hurt too much, but because there was nothing new to say. The mystery had resolved itself into something ordinary and disappointing. A pattern, not a puzzle. My mother never asked me to reconcile. That mattered more than she probably knew. Over time, I saw how the experience had settled in her too. She was warmer with people, but firmer. Kinder, but clearer. When she helped now, it was practical and bounded. No jars, no envelopes. As for me, the sharpness dulled. I stopped replaying conversations. I stopped imagining alternative outcomes. The story lost its emotional charge and became something I could hold without flinching. Sometimes I wondered if my aunt ever believed her own version completely, or if there had always been a line she knew she was crossing. I never got an answer, and eventually, I stopped needing one. What stayed with me wasn't bitterness. It was awareness. Not suspicion exactly, but attention. I learned that love doesn't require blindness, and help doesn't have to mean surrendering your judgment. Those weren't lessons I announced or preached. They just changed how I moved through the world. Years later, I found an old bank screenshot while clearing out my phone. For a moment, I considered deleting it. Then I left it where it was. Not as evidence, just as a marker. A reminder of the moment when I stopped doubting what I was seeing. The jar, the envelopes, the coughs, the fear. All of it belonged to a chapter that was closed, not because it ended cleanly, but because I chose to stop participating. And that choice held.